Welcome to Marin Voices and Views. With Lawrence A. Strick, I'm Peter B. Collins. Today, we focus on Marin County's regulation of cannabis for medical and recreational use. Last year, the Board of Supervisors enacted a plan for up to 4 medical marijuana dispensaries in unincorporated areas of the county. And in November 2016, a whopping 89% of Marin voters approved recreational marijuana in the passage of Proposition 64. Supervisor Damon Connolly returns to our show today, now in his 3rd year representing District 1. He's a former San Rafael City Councilman, was a supervising Deputy California Attorney General, and he's in training now to run the Dipsy later this year. Good luck, Damon.
Thank you.
Also with us is Andrew D'Angelo. He's the Director of Operations at the Harborside Health Center in Oakland, the nonprofit that is the largest medical cannabis distribution outlet in the world. He worked on the campaign that passed Proposition 215 in 1996, legalizing medical cannabis, as well as a similar measure in Washington, D.C. in 1998. Some viewers may also have seen him on the Discovery Channel series called Weed Wars. Andrew, welcome.
Thank you.
We look forward to your perspective, particularly beyond Marin County. So thanks for being here today.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Larry?
Great. Damon, let's start off with the status quo ante. Give us an update on the medical marijuana dispensary issue in Marin. I know that you, with Judy Arnold, Supervisor Judy Arnold, have co-chaired the task force that's developing the rules and have just completed a series of hearings with the 10 dispensary applicants that are competing for 4 locations. Where are we on this here in the county?
So that's a really good summary. Where we're at is we received 10 applicants. We've had a number of community hearings about specific proposed locations around the county where these up to 4 dispensaries could be located. At this point, our Chief Administrative Officer, Matthew Heimel, will be making decisions with a community advisory committee that he appointed as they sort through these applications and ultimately decide on up to 4. My sense is there probably will be a fewer number to start out with. And I expect his review to be over by the end of April. Other applicants then have a right to appeal his decision, and that would be to the Board of Supervisors.
So you expect less to see how the program gets off the ground, or is it because of the community pushback? It seems to me these hearings have been a little bit heated about not my neighborhood, please.
You noticed that,
I
didn't
did.
you? Yes. I think reading the tea leaves, that would just be my educated guess at this point. I think clearly there has been way more pushback in some areas as opposed to others. Part of the process will be to review the quality of the applicant seeking the license to run the dispensary. So certainly that's not to be overlooked as well.
Damon, let's stay with medical marijuana for now, and we'll expand the conversation to talk about recreational access in a bit. Now, it's pretty amazing that after 20 years since the passage of Prop 215, Marin County has no medical outlets presently. There are, I guess, 1 or 2 delivery services that people can use. And I would say that medical users have priority since we know how much cancer patients and many others can benefit from cannabis. So what are the remaining obstacles beyond this process of location selection?
I agree with your assessment. I think we were long overdue to bring this forward. It was something that I stepped up to do with Supervisor Arnold when I got elected. So where we're at is I think the community does recognize, this is part of our social safety net, that there's a legitimate use for cannabis for medical purposes. And our timing was good in that while we were doing our process, the state was also undertaking its more formal process as well to come up with the Medical Cannabis Regulatory Act that is now in effect as well. We were a little bit ahead of the curve in that what our ordinance says is if you want to deliver, you actually have to be connected with a brick and mortar storefront as well. And
Locally, it has to be
absolutely, and that's what the state law says at this point as well.
Aren't there deliveries occurring in Marin despite the fact that we don't have a local dispensary?
That's correct. So what I'm suggesting to you is leading up to this point, we were in a bit of a wild, wild west situation.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one of the issues that the state law sought to address.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And do you feel that people are more comfortable tolerating the status quo and just kind of, pretending that this doesn't go on, while medical users essentially have to access the black market or maybe travel to Harborside over in Oakland?
I think you hit it on the head in some of your earlier remarks. If you recall, Prop 215 passed comfortably statewide and overwhelmingly in Marin. More recently, Prop 64 also passed, and one correction I'll make is it was 70% approval in Marin County. That's
Then
still that.
I have to blame the IJ. I lifted it from a recent article there.
Let's face it, though, 70%, no bones about it.
Mm-hmm.
That's a strong percentage.
Landslide.
It is.
Yeah.
Yet when you get to the level of where can a storefront dispensary potentially be located, that's where you get into a lot of community opposition. What we're trying to do is take the position in Marin County, let's get a successful medical cannabis program up and running first. Some of the feedback I'm hearing is that communities are more willing to look at a medical dispensary if they know that that ultimately will mean that they won't see a recreational facility in their area, at least. So that's kind of been some interesting feedback as well.
So Andrew, you're from outside our little county over here. Unique as it is, Marin has its issues on a lot of neighborhood stuff.
Sure.
How would you contrast that with your struggles in Oakland or things you've seen outside around the state and outside the Bay Area?
Well, I think the problem that communities have with medical cannabis dispensaries or adult use dispensaries, I call it adult use instead of recreational. I think it's a more accurate description. People are afraid. There's a lot of stigma still associated with cannabis. There's been a lot of misinformation given to folks about cannabis for 100 years. Both this state's government and the federal government for many, many decades spread half-truths or outright lies about cannabis, and it concerns a lot of people. In Oakland and Alameda County, we started with medical dispensary licensing about 12 years ago in Oakland. They were the first municipality to license and regulate dispensaries. Licensing and regulation is very important for dispensaries and for communities to be protected. Some rules of the road need to exist because cannabis is an intoxicant, and it can be a strong intoxicant, and we want to make sure our households are safe, we want to make sure our children are safe, pets are safe, and that our communities are safe. So I think people's concerns are not without validity, but what we've seen in Oakland and Alameda County is if you zone these dispensaries in the right areas, if you create reasonable buffers between schools and residential areas and the dispensaries themselves, then in Alameda County and Oakland, the elected officials really stepped up and approved, despite neighborhood opposition, approved the dispensaries to locate there. Certainly they kept their eyes on us, and they made sure that we operated in a good way, and we did in fact keep our promise to keep communities and families and households safe from the harmful effects of cannabis. But once we were able to demonstrate that over the years, the elected officials, the communities, all the groups have gotten a lot more comfortable. They realized the sky did not, in fact, fall upon their heads by having a medical cannabis dispensary in their community. They actually saw a lot of benefits. Crime has gone down in the community in Oakland that we've occupied for the last 10 and a half years. Businesses have opened. The community has gotten cleaner. Adopt a Spot has occurred basically because of us in those neighborhoods, and we're close to our neighbors, and we want to be good neighbors. It's actually part of our mission statement is to be good neighbors with our community. So once you operate in that way and you gain trust, as we have in the community, after many years, Harborside even had the city of Oakland defend us when the federal government tried to issue a forfeiture action against us. So we developed trust with our city officials, our elected officials, and we proved ourselves to be responsible operators. And I think once the licensees in Marin do that and demonstrate that and build trust with the community, I think the community here is a pretty progressive community. They voted overwhelming for both 215 and 64. So it's a progressive community, and they'll get more comfortable over time. And I think, 5 years from now, this will be a very normal thing inside the community, and we'll have a lot of support.
Damon, we did have a medical dispensary in Fairfax, and it was pressured out of business during the crackdown in 2010, 2011 by the Northern California U.S. Attorney's Office. Are there any lessons from that can be applied to the current effort to find new locations? Did Fairfax have any enhanced police activity? Was there any criminal behavior? Was there any sale to minors that needs to be addressed in the regime going forward?
The lessons learned from Fairfax, and much broader than that, I mean, we've really had now an opportunity to go out and see dispensaries all over the region that are working, others that maybe learn tough lessons along the way. So in crafting an ordinance, we really had that hindsight as a benefit. So we address things like buffer zones, safety precautions, security requirements, capitalization. The last thing we want is a fly-by-night operation. Ideally, local connections as well. So
let's not use the word connections. That's a drug term.
Oh, is it? Okay.
You mean roots in the community.
Local roots, better said, for sure. Labor standards, environmental issues. So there's all sorts of best practices that have emerged in the industry. It's a different industry now, let's face it, over time. Gone is the iconic image maybe of more of a hippie, or it's you have MBAs doing this now, you have well-respected local members of the community, so it's been an interesting education.
So turning from the medical dispensaries to Proposition 64, which was drafted basically under a team with Lieutenant Governor Newsom, the implementation and the plans are for the sale of cannabis to adult users. It's scheduled to go online next January. I can't help but think that there's going to be a couple of speed bumps, and it might slow things down a little bit. When do you foresee it going online here in the state, and when can we expect a store in Marin County? Is it going to be for my grandchildren or or what?
Well, I think part of it is a lot of local communities are waiting to see how things sort out at the state level with the regulations. As you noted, I think the timing's a little bit unclear, although the statute requires by January 1. I think it'll be pushed back. The hallmark of this new state legislation is that communities retain their discretion on deciding how much do they want to wade into the various aspects of cannabis. To date, most, if not all, local communities here in Marin have decided to do a moratorium or a ban for the time being. That's in part, I think, because of the uncertainty and including how will local control ultimately be affected, if you will. I think part of it is local communities are sorting out what is the best way for them to get involved in this. Counties to our north will be way bigger on cultivation, for example. I do not see Marin being a big cultivation area beyond, as I think Peter noted, the smaller cultivation for personal use that's allowed indoors as a matter of right. Will Marin towns and cities see other benefits, though? Again, the approach I think we're taking as a county, we'll take the lead on medical. Does a Santa Fe or does a Fairfax decide, hey, we might, beyond whether or not it makes sense to have a storefront in town, can some manufacturing occur? I almost envision some creative Marin folks coming up with the latest, greatest cookie, maybe, right? Or other baked goods. Right. Will this be a site for testing, for example? So those are the kind of decisions communities have to make on an individual basis.
Do the communities or the county see this as a significant revenue generator?
Not on the medical side. I think on the recreational side, that's a key issue that's being sorted out. And I think different communities are at different stages of the game if you look around the region.
Andrew, street sales of marijuana seem to be more acceptable to many people than the idea of a retail cannabis store in their particular community. Yet they tolerate liquor stores, tobacco retail sales, and those are provably more dangerous than the typical adult use of cannabis. How do we square these conflicting attitudes?
Well, I think it's very hard to square the conflicting attitudes. I think the best way is to make sure the least harmful of the substances that are legal and available to adults has the widest access. Right now, that's sort of the opposite is the case. Tobacco and alcohol is much more accessible in a storefront in Marin than cannabis is. But
and we don't have any casinos here, but people are pretty comfortable with card rooms and the casinos in San Pablo, and
yes.
Those attract a potentially criminal element.
Well, and not to mention legal gun sales and firearm sales. So these are all things that are in our community for adults to use as they wish in a safe and responsible manner. It's not a gun's fault if somebody gets killed from a gun. It's the human being that interacted with that gun has caused that to happen. And it's the same thing with these other substances and these other areas that are strictly designed for adults only. And I think the best way for communities to make sure adults interact with these areas that are for adults only is to create access and education and to make sure that this is done in a safe manner. For example, in our dispensaries we sell locked cases. So you can put your medicine in a locked case. It costs about $60 to $80, depends on how big the case is. Well, it should probably be regulated that these locked cases are available in all the dispensaries so people can keep their households safe and that their pets and their children can't get access to this. Similar to a gun safe in your home, you would have a safe that you would put your hunting rifle in, for instance, to protect your household, your pets, your children. And so we've proven in our society that adults can, in fact, create safe zones for adult-only activity, and I think we're intelligent enough and responsible enough that we can do the same thing with cannabis. And in fact, it is the will of the voters that they have access both to medical and adult use cannabis. It's overwhelming the will of the voters, and despite some opposition from communities, the will of the voters in a democracy must be respected. And we have political mandates in this country with much smaller majorities than we've had with cannabis. And so I think we have a mandate, and it's up to all of us to collaborate together in a good way to make sure that we do this in a safe and responsible way that will bring benefits to the community, whether it be tax revenue or people with cancer. and limit the harms.
I think that was a key point. I think, what really has to happen is that interaction with the community. Yeah. I think that's really the key piece of it.
Because there seems to be a contradiction. On one hand, 70% of Marin voters want this. On the other hand, when you start, dialing down into the community and talking to the voters, they want it like over there, not over here.
Well, and you're actually seeing that in these hearings. You'll have some folks actually get up at the podium and say, marijuana is my favorite thing. I love marijuana, but it's not going to happen in my neighborhood.
But I want it on your block. But that does take education. That does take information. Are we getting information from states like Washington and Colorado that are really going through this in real time? And are people's attitudes changing? And in a county like this that's getting older and older and older by the minute, is it going to be easier or harder to change the opinions that people have about marijuana, cannabis stores for recreational use or any use being in their neighborhood? What are you seeing?
I think that's what we're going to have to sort out. And again, I think, maybe you walk before you run. Yeah. We really are seeing this medical cannabis dispensary program as a way to get a successful track record. Even there, we are, as was noted earlier, getting some pushback. But we'll keep working with the community, and again, the goal is to be successful in that regard.
I guess, is there any thought that or information that you've seen or the Board of Supervisors have seen is, if you say, okay, we're not going to do this at all, would people be upset by its total absence?
I think the answer to that is yes. And again, I think the timing was right. The media was on our side. We had a tremendous number of people show up to the hearings. We got great input, literally as we kind of tweaked the ordinance. And so we wouldn't have gone forward if it was all bad. And all negative. So I think there is a desire, with the backdrop, again, of overwhelming voter support, at least on the overall issue, to go forward. Now, once we get into recreational, again, theoretically, everyone, voted yes, including myself. How do the details look, though? And again, what may make sense for Humboldt or Mendocino or Alameda may not make sense for Marin. That having been said, there could be some opportunities for our local
I don't
communities.
think this argument is lost on you, Damon, but I want to make it anyway, and that is that Prop 215 and Prop 64 confer a right on adults to purchase marijuana in California and to hopefully end the black market. And I think that right has to be honored, even if you have people who are kicking and screaming and saying, oh no, not here. And I believe the county does have an obligation to provide at least one outlet, to honor the laws and the will of the voters. Would you agree?
On medical, that is the direction we're heading. Again, on recreational, I think the other key aspect of the law that really is the balancing act is it also makes clear that local communities have the absolute right to decide for themselves to what extent they want to participate. Mm-hmm. So I think what we have to do as elected officials, as stakeholders, as community members, is strike that right balance. And again, I'm confident that we're at least going to be having that conversation.
And Andrew, does Harborside intend to move into the distribution for adult use when the law is implemented next January or later?
We would like to be able to do that. Some of this will depend on how the regulations happen. But certainly, for us, there should only be one market for cannabis, not two markets. In Colorado, you have this absurdity where you've got two entrances to the same dispensary, one for adults and one for medical. Same inventory on both sides and both doors, tax rates are a little different on each one. The burden that places on the operator and the people themselves it's Kafkaesque in its absurdity. So it would be nice if California could avoid those types of regulatory mistakes. We actually just had the governor of Colorado testifying last week up in Sacramento. So elected officials like the supervisor here are certainly gathering information from other states, and I think are expending a certain amount of personal political capital to try to get this implemented and create safe access for both medical and adults. And it's cannabis. It's going to be controversial. There's going to be at least one person in every community that's going to be a very loud and vocal minority. But there's absolutely no question that this is a democracy that we live in, and there's no question that the will of the voters is overwhelming on this issue, much more than other issues that have much narrower mandates from the voters that seem to be not have as much gravity or resistance to implementation as we're seeing with cannabis. But it is cannabis, and it will always be controversial. And walking before we run and crawling before we walk is not a bad idea.
And with just about 30 seconds, Damon, how would you wrap this up in terms of informing our viewers about next steps?
So we welcome the feedback. People have not been shy about showing up to the hearings. Even the hearings have now wrapped up. We'd still love to hear from folks on their thoughts. As mentioned, the county is going to be making some decisions around how many dispensaries to approve, where they should be. So that's happening right now. So we would love to have their feedback. And of course, on the broader issue as we go forward on cannabis overall, that's going to be crucial as well.
Supervisor Damon Connolly, Andrew D'Angelo, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.